Item 9.3, adopting the proposed fiscal year budget for all funds.
Thank you, President Ryan and members of the board. Obviously, these are rare occasions in which, as your employee, I'm also speaking from the podium, but I thought that this was an important item for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, we are going through a CBO transition at the moment, and secondly, because as I near the one-year milestone and have had the opportunity to study the budget that I inherited, there's a lot of adages about budgets, and one of them is, of course, that it's not just a collection of numbers, but an expression of our values as well as our aspirations. I feel that superintendents are expressing those values and aspirations through their budget proposals. And so I took this first budget proposal to the board as your superintendent very seriously and have spent countless hours trying to understand what the budget was that I came into and what is the budget that I want to pursue in terms of my philosophies that should be proposed to you as our board. So let me start by saying that in terms of overview, what you will see over the next few minutes is or are numbers that are based on the May revise. And we know that a lot of those numbers are shifting day to day, especially those of you who spend time at the Capitol. But nevertheless, our county office does advise us that we are to use the May revise numbers at this stage. Secondly, that those projections in terms of expenses for the next year and the expense amounts, of course, could change after the budget is adopted, and I'm as anxiously awaiting for that as you are. That we have 45 calendar days after adopting our budget, today's June 21st, based on the governor's final signed budget, and that in the interest of transparency, and given the fact that I am not a CPA, and I've not been a CBO or a CFO, that I would like to also recommend that we commission an independent financial audit of the district as well. Now, with that in mind, here's what I'm aware of as a non-CPA, non-CFO, or CBO. And that is that currently our revenues for the following year are projected, again, based on the numbers that we have access to be about $531 million. And that our expenses are projected to be $559 million. That we all are aware that in his final year, Governor Brown has fast-forwarded the LCFF funding to us 2 years ahead of schedule, and that as a result, this year we will project to receive about $22.5 million in LCFF resources simply by looking at the proposed ADA and multiplying it by our current student population of about 38,000 students or so. And that because he has fast-forwarded that funding, that the best we can do is simply think about what is the base funding for the following years, knowing that we will have a new governor and that new governor may have a different funding mechanism in the future, but that we do have access to what the ADA per student is projected to be for the following out years. So we expect to receive about 22.5 additional resources as a result of the governor's action to fully fund LCFF. Now again, as of the May revise figures, that $22.5 million or so is added to what we were told that we could calculate in May as one-time funds of about $13 million for a total of an additional $35,700,000 or so. Well, we do have obligations as a district, some of which we don't have control over. And those include increases in LCFF funding, but contributions that we are making to a number of our programs, including our child development program, where we are going to be contributing about $650,000, routine repair maintenance contributions of about $880,000, special ed in about the amount of 1.4 beyond what we receive, health benefits, which we are projecting at the moment to be about 3%, OPEB contribution minimum payment of $3 million, step and column, per STRS, and the total of all employee compensation agreements. That, as you saw earlier, is a higher expense amount than what we will be receiving in additional resources. Again, in terms of just projections, none of us hope that this will be the case and that the new governor will have a different set of philosophies that might bring the funding that we receive more in line with the obligations that we have with respect to expenses. I do want to say that in the spirit of transparency, each of the slides that have a data source over the next couple of days will be hyperlinked and on our website as well. If we carry that $22.5 million plus the one-time as of the May revise, totals about $35,700,000, and we look at these obligations, which total the following. We are projecting that our step and column for certificated will be about $2.5 million. Our step and column for classified will be about $645,000. Projected health increase of 3%, 2.2. STRS, 6.7 million. CalPERS, 2.6. The increase that I talked about in terms of special ed, 1.4. The increase to the Child Development Fund. The mandatory increases to routine repair and maintenance costs, the total agreements of our employee compensations, the minimum payment for OPEB, that amounts to $38 million, which leaves us $3 million short. Of course, you know that these obligations around pensions are real and that we can project these out. And those projections show that we will be contributing more resources for CalPERS and CalSTRS. In terms of health costs, very interesting looking at trend data, which is something that I asked about. You can see that in terms of actuals, because we're at the mercy of the open marketplace in terms of healthcare, there's huge deviations in the cost associated to this expense. See, in 14-15, it was 11.1%. Again, according to the data that I was given, 7.4, 7.0, etc. And we are projecting for the moment, based on information that we have received from providers, that this year it will be about 3%. But because we can't project what those expenses will be in out years, I just went ahead and put 5%. But of course, we've seen other actual expenses that have been higher than 5%. So we're taking the 3% into account for the budget development for 18-19, but we're simply saying this is what it would cost if it were 5% in out years, knowing that the average over the past few years has been 6.5%. But when you look at this as a trend, again, prior to 18-19, you see that for a while, our revenues were exceeding our expenses. And that has begun to shift now and will continue to shift when we take into consideration those increased obligation expenses and we look at, as best we can, what our revenues are going to be based on the current funding formula. What effect does this have on our reserves? We will see what the actuals are, but we are projecting to have about $61 million in reserves because we are essentially borrowing from this savings account based on the fact that our expenses outpace our revenues. You can see the effect that it will have on our reserves a year from now, and at 2021, falling below the 2% reserve that is mandated by law. Well, today's June 21st, and we don't have a budget that's signed yet. And this slide simply depicts what happens between the time that we adopt the budget and when we close out our budget year, our fiscal budget year. For the most part, you can see that the adopted revenue versus the actual revenue, our actual revenue has tended to be higher than what we adopt. Now, in terms of the fluidity of budget decisions and why county offices ask that we use May revised data, I thought I would give you a summary of what that would look like for us here if we were to use other things other than May revised data. On June 7th, we were told as part of the May revised that we would receive some additional LCFF resources, and the projection was that we would have $395 million. We were also told that our one-time funds would total $13 million. And that amounts to $408 million or so. About 5 days later, we got the news that maybe it would be $397 million. But that our one-time funds would go down to about $6.4 million. Now the total was $403 million. And a day later, we received news that there was an increase via COLA, and that would be $836,000 for a total of $404 million. And between June 7th and June 13th, there was a net loss of a little over $4 million. That's the fluidity of the budget process, and of course, I know what some of your roles are during the day, and you're welcome to speak on that issue. I'm spending a lot of time at the state capitol. Well, what does it mean in terms of what I hope will begin to shift in terms of a culture as a governance team, that we will expect our new CBO not to treat interim reports and such as a checklist, and that we won't treat it as a checklist either. And I'm using 16-17 data. I obviously was not here, and some of you were as board members. What I'm told is that in June 16, our board adopted, before the budget was finalized, a budget of $491 million. And the CBO came in October and said, we're calculating that it might be $506 million. And I asked, how do you attribute, or how did you attribute that increase? And this is what I learned. I learned that in the fiscal budget year 15-16, there was a carryover of $2 million in Title I, $11.4 million in an emergency repair program fund, and a new CTE incentive grant that probably was included in the final budget of $2.5 million. That's how we attribute the difference between 491 and 506. In January, the CBO came back and said, now we're projecting $511 million. And that was because there was an additional grant of $3.3 million, a SIG grant, and $900,000 in leases and rentals. And then the actuals showed $498 million when we closed out our fiscal year. I asked, how did that happen? And it was because there was a carryover of this emergency repair fund, which was originally estimated at 13.4. The actual revenue was 20.4 for the difference of about $7 million. There was also final ADA numbers instead of what we had estimated, which was a bit of a drop in the unduplicated percentage of our ADA. The same exact thing happens with expenses, what we project to be expenses and what eventually are final expenses. And I'll do the same exact thing. We adopted in 2016, or some of you did, projected expenses of $493 million, then went to $513 million, 511, and a total of 491. Some of it was due to salary savings in terms of vacancies. Some of it was grants that came through. Now, that $28.5 million gap could be covered if we could find an additional 5,485 students, of course. That is unlikely. I've also learned in my first 11 months that Delta Shores, rail yards, new developments are coming in. But of course, we don't expect that in the near future. Increased revenues and or one-time funds from the state. Of course, we're all aware that we're going through a shift in governors. We know we will have a new governor, and we all have to wait to see if there will be a different funding formula that might allow us to cover these gaps. And then parcel taxes, of course, not viable for short-term solutions. So what are some options that I would propose to the board as superintendent? Well, as I've begun to talk about some of this with staff, they've said, well, look to your central office, to the district office. And I've asked our staff to gather this information around what is the total administrative expenses in our central office. And I've compared it with nearby districts. And in 2012, 2013, we had the lowest admin expense as a central office at 2.7. In 2013-14, the same. 14-15, a little bit different. We were at 4.5, but you can see others growing. 2015-16, we went back to the lowest. 2016-17, the same. In 2017-18, we are still among the lowest. At 4.2% is what we're expecting for a total of $13.8 million, again, out of a budget of over $500 million. So we run a pretty lean central office. And I can tell you as such because I'm growing more and more frustrated about how lean we are. Several of our community members have come before us to talk about, for example, our ASL programs, our dual immersion programs, our German programs. And I have been quite surprised that in our district office we do not have a specialist around world languages. I was honored, along with President Ryan, to have been invited to view the Dolores Huerta documentary a number of months ago. And by confusion, I ended up going to the Crest Theater and saw that they were previewing the RGB documentary and couldn't help but think about the value of renting out those facilities for our teachers to then figure out how we can embed into our curriculum the stories of these amazing women. And when the Dolores Huerta documentary was being organized, I realized, after talking to our CAO, that we didn't have a social sciences curriculum specialist in the district office. So there are a number of examples like that where I can tell you that we have a pretty lean central office. I've also asked for a summary of external contract expenses, partnerships and collaborations that we have with organizations with whom we contract to serve our students and our families and other stakeholders. And that amounts to about $2.2 million. Well, I'm not prepared in my first 11 months to look to those areas entirely to try to cover these gaps, because if we're spending about $13.8 million in the central office, a little over $2 million in external contracts, that would not make up for the $28.5 million gap. Now, this image shows how we distribute every dollar that we receive. You can see that all of it is spent mostly on salaries and benefits, operational expenses, books and supplies, and equipment. Of course, every dollar that we save is a dollar more for our students. There are a number of programs that I've come to know about during learning sessions that I've held with our staff that I've learned have lost funding, and to my surprise, were being funded entirely through grants. So our induction program, for example, was a very valuable asset to our first-year teachers, for example. We lost our grant of about $2.6 million, and we, of course, have to operate an induction program for our new teachers. Last thing we want to do is, when I became a first-year teacher, I didn't get a lot of professional learning in LA Unified. So we have to make up for those lost revenues by figuring out how to sustain at least a skeletal program. So we've put together a program that would cost us about $1 million. New Tech High School, which is still one of our smallest schools, needs the resources to stay open. Luther Burbank lost a COEA grant of over $2 million and needs to have some soft landing resources. The same is true for curriculum, professional development, student support services. So we've lost over $6.4 million, and we have to maintain some of these programs at about $2.3 million. Same is true for child development, youth engagement. You heard many of our community members express that we need to stay committed to these programs, but we've lost funding for them. And even though we've lost $3 million, to operate these programs is going to cost us about $4.8 million. And so when we met each other 11 months ago, I was so excited to think that we would not be in a position where we were just selling a vision, that we could actualize a vision. And I have made a proposal that we allocate resources to expand our safe haven work, which this board has been appropriately recognized for your leadership on. And we've talked about incentivizing some of our DACA students to pursue a teaching credential program through one of our colleges and universities, so that instead of entering the workforce, they could pursue a teacher credential program and we could offer them employment as teachers. And I'd like to allocate about $50,000 toward that initiative. I also would like to propose that we allocate about $35,000 to expand our PSAT program to 8th and 9th graders. We, of course, already offer the PSAT to all of our 10th graders, and this year we offered the SAT during the day for all of our 11th graders. So for about $35,000 more, we could offer the PSAT to 8th, 9th, 10th, and the SAT to 11th graders. I also am proposing that we spend $136,000 to offer every student the opportunity to take an AP or IB test. You heard earlier from Dr. Taylor that we are looking to expand these programs, but I was very disheartened to learn as I was accessing these data that almost 1,200 students took an AP course but didn't take an AP test. And that, of course, is because every AP test costs $90 each. And I remember, if I could personalize this a little bit, when Obamacare came out, my parents were not low income enough to qualify for Medi-Cal, and they weren't high income enough to purchase insurance outright. And I can't help but think about how many of these 1,200 missed AP exams were from students in that same situation where $90 times 2 or 3 AP tests is a large chunk of resources for many of our parents. I also was surprised to learn that, as you heard from one of our community members, we have wonderful student leadership conferences available in this community. And we have not allocated any resources to support our students to pursue the opportunity to attend leadership conferences. Of course, we have to transport them. We have to pay our teachers, our counselors to join them. On a lot of occasions, they're taking place on Saturdays. So I'd like to propose a $50,000 appropriation toward that. I apologize that this is an outdated slide. In terms of grade level readiness initiatives, of course, we commissioned a grad task force, and we heard earlier about Assemblymember Weber's commitment to serve our lowest performing, most high at-risk youth through a bill that we're all hoping is signed. But in the event that it weren't signed, and again, until it's signed, we've actually begun to disaggregate data. If our interpretation is correct in terms of how students are being identified and how funding will flow to the districts, it suggests that it's $2,000 per student. We've identified a little over 900 students. So we could project that we might be eligible to receive $1.9 million under that bill, but I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to put that as a projection just yet. In the event that that doesn't come through, I'd like to propose that we allocate $350,000 to support continuing to deconstruct our graduation task force recommendations and then put together an initiative for our lowest performing, most high at-risk students, specifically African American students, in much the same fashion that we try to attack our graduation rates as well. That amounts to about $620,000, and that is the most that I feel comfortable proposing to the board. Certainly not something that I am necessarily proud of, nor does it make me feel that we are actualizing the vision of equity, access, and social justice. I'm also proposing some initial reductions to start getting at beginning the process of closing the gap that, again, without a financial audit taking place, is the information that I feel comfortable providing to the board. We've started an expanded learning summer program, as you know. We are monitoring attendance very carefully. As of this afternoon, 76% of the students that we had identified are attending summer school, a little over 3,000 students. It's entirely designed to help students reach grade level proficiency, or at least get closer to grade level proficiency during the summer months, as well as ensuring that those students that are performing at grade level or significantly on grade level, particularly incoming 7th and 8th grade students, as a way to diversify our specialty programs in the near future. It rests on those principles, and we had allocated $3 million in next year's budget that I would propose we look to cut for next year. We would also look to put a hiring freeze in our central office. We would not eliminate bilingual aids by any means. We are just looking to shift the revenue source to a different category, namely Title I. We've identified some cuts in the central office. We will put some restrictions in terms of travel that is not funded by a grant or an award. Reducing our mentoring of some administrators, and a slight reduction to our recruitment budget for a total of little over $5 million. These cuts would put us in a position where we would still fall below the 2% reserve that's obligated by law at the end of 1920. And of course, in terms of next steps, I will anxiously be looking to the budget that is approved by the governor over the next few days. And once we learn about that, coming back to you within 45 days after adopting this budget, should you vote for it, based on the final budget that the governor signs. So I will stop there. Again, being very candid that if you ask me too much details, I will ask our current CBO to try to answer those questions, but I do want to make it, open it up to comments and questions.
much more than just provide courses for credit, which is a big part of our district's current vision of expanding and improving graduation rates, and that is definitely a big part of what we do, but that is just the beginning. We have homework and study skills improvements to help students stay on track to continue to move toward graduation. We help with that. Sometimes home is not a safe option, and we provide safe spaces. We can help with that. Our students often worry about our current political climate, about safety issues on our own campuses in our own neighborhoods. We can provide a space for students to advocate for their own safety. We help with that. Sometimes the state needs somebody to manage our food program that provides healthy resources and healthy foods to our youth free of charge. We help with that. Our accreditation reports, expanded learning can help support our accreditation processes. We help with that. Scheduling changes, political leaders visit and use our spaces. In the most recent weeks, we helped out when there was a hiring crisis in our ELSP program, and they asked us to help with that. We didn't flinch. We helped.
Both you and your colleagues spoke out on this tonight. I think there was a misassumption that this was being cut. This is actually one of the programs that we're backfilling the grant funding on this year.
We're just speaking to make sure it gets accepted. That's all that we want.
Wonderful.
And so tonight, as a matter of fact, in addressing the things that we do help with, all we're asking is, can you help?
Thank you. We appreciate your efforts.
Good evening, board members and Superintendent Jorge Aguilar. My name is Maria Jose Luna. I am the Assets Program Manager at McClatchy High School, and it's a great day to be a Lion. I'm here tonight to first thank you for all the support that you provided to many of the after-school programs in our district this school year. You have been helping us throughout, not just McClatchy, but many other programs as well. Your support this year helped a daily average of 370 students, McClatchy students. Your support allowed many of our English learners to improve academically. It provided students with many enrichment opportunities, such as acting, becoming certified ready-to-work lifeguards, and more. Students learned about coding, programming through our robotics class, and an average of 80 students had a safe space to finish homework, school projects, such as senior projects in what is very, very well known at McClatchy as the library. Students had mentors who gave guidance and academic support for 5 days every week of the year. Superintendent Jorge Aguilar, this year, I saw you many times at McClatchy, and you were able to see what McClatchy looks like after school. It looks alive. You visited specifically one of our ESL academic support classes made up of many Latinos and Afghan students receiving academic, social, emotional learning support. So tonight, board members, I would really appreciate if you continue to support our programs. You've seen the improvement in our students. You see how many students we serve every year, every day at our schools. We love our schools, and we would like to continue to keep doing this amazing work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, board. My name is Tristan Jenkins. I'm the assets coordinator over at Health Professions High School and currently acting as the summer coordinator for summer service over at JFK High School. So again, just want to support my colleagues and again, put it on record, the importance of after-school programming. I've worked in expanded learning, both regular year and summer programming for the past 6 years as part of the Assets Program and Summer of Service at Hiram Johnson, Health Professions, and now JFK High School. And there is a difference between students who participate in our programs and those who do not. It's very clear to anyone who spends time with them, and just continuing to enforce that this is a big part of a lot of our students' lives, and any gap in funding would create some problems that I don't think would be coverable by other means, and just making sure that the funding is always available to them. Thank you.
My name is Linda Hadamia. Hello, Superintendent and board members. I am a Kennedy High School teacher. I've been teaching Chinese for 21 years, and I was a parent. My 4 kids graduated from Kennedy, and I'm also a resident in the Greenhaven area. And we all know Kennedy is a very outstanding school, and the ACES program really helped the Kennedy to become a better school. And the students, the AP students, the gay students, they have chance to go into the library and do some research and things like that after school in the library. There's also tutoring provided under the leadership of our director, Chandler Cooper, and she is amazing. Under her leadership, the whole school is just different. The principal needs her. The vice principal need her. All the teachers need her. Parents need her. Students need her. And she has helped a lot of students and the parents. So she really made an impact for our school. So I love Kennedy, and I just here to voice my my concern about Kennedy. I hope we could continue with this ACES program, because it's really make a difference for Kennedy High School. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Wesley Smith, and I understand the board's time is valuable, so I'll be brief. I'm a team leader, student mentor at CK McClatchy. I interact with the students on a daily basis, and I provide the academic extracurricular support on a daily basis. But beyond that, the not so obvious benefit is the mentorship that I give to the students that I feel lasts for years to come. And beyond wanting the students to succeed academically, I want them to succeed as citizens, as good citizens. And I feel like what we do at the program makes a difference. And I've seen hundreds of students come through our program at McClatchy now. I can tell you with certainty that we've made a lasting difference in many students' lives. Please do anything you can to continue the good work we do at CK McClatchy and John F. Kennedy High School. Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen Sweat, we, MCW, recommend you adopt this budget. We also recommend you begin serious, authentic monitoring. So I have a posted report from our district website, and there are approximately over 20 departments at the CERNA that have spent over their budget already. And in fact, since we've been monitoring, we know that they started overspending way back in January. And there are 15 school sites that are considerably over their budget. This would just be one little thing that could be done, and this is authentic monitoring, which means the budget committee can't keep canceling. They have to show up, and they should bring expenditure reports with them. They should be looking at what has been spent and what hasn't been spent. And that means you've got to learn to read SACs. Thanks. That was a great budget presentation.
Good evening again. Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. I also want to echo Ms. Sweat's congratulations to the superintendent for such a transparent presentation. But I'm happy to say that I understood it in part because of the haranguing and the friendship that I have with Ms. Sweat over the years. It is because of NCW, Karen and Bob and Dave, that I understand that revenue changes constantly, that their trending analysis has helped me understand that, and it's also taught me the importance of following the state's budget calendar and the reports that the districts are required to make to the county, then to the state. And I totally support the the recommendation for an independent financial audit, and I request that there be community engagement when that happens. With regard to the deficit, I want to point out on our budget, I think it's page 20 of 166 in the packet. We're estimating that at the end of 17-18 in our actuals, we're going to save $28 million to cover future deficit spending. We're saving now $28 million for something in the future when we now have a $28 million deficit. That just seems wrong. It seems like we should be spending money that we have today for the needs that we have today, and that's a lot of money. Thank you.
Laureen Pryor, Black Youth Leadership Project. So I was looking at the proposed investments for your equity, access, and social justice. And what I would like to see is that some sort of breakout of what we plan to do about our Black students. I mean, to lump in everything, I don't know exactly what you're committing to Black students who seem to be in crisis in your district. And then I see the Safe Haven Fund that you have separated out. I think Black kids need a safe haven. So I think that there should be some sort of funds dedicated to that as well. And I need it to be a priority. I don't need it to be lip service. I need it to be a priority, because if we're not going to invest in these students, then we're telling them that they're not valuable. And people who are not valued cannot learn, and they don't feel safe. If I cannot learn and I don't feel safe, then I'm being put out of your classrooms, which you're getting funding for me to be there. So I need this to be a priority for everyone up here, not just Miss Jessie, not just my jumping in with a couple of comments. I need it to be a priority because kids, Black kids in this district are in crisis. And if we are not going to grasp the gravity of this situation, we're doing a real disservice to the students that you're sitting here to service. So I would just like you to put that in and to really think about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for so much of your time today. I want to preface my comments by referring to the Sac City Unified Core Value. The first bullet point on the website is equity. Commitment to reducing the achievement gap by ensuring that all students have equal access to the opportunities, support, and tools that they need to be successful. Moving on to the goals. The second bullet point is safe, emotionally healthy, and engaged students. And to be quite frank with you, budgets are a reflection of priorities, and I don't see those priorities outlined in this budget. So specifically talking about the proposed one-time investment in equity, access, and social justice, just putting that lump there saying, you know, grade level readiness initiative, I think there needs to be a deeper dive, and if everyone on the board, especially President Ryan and Board Member Vang, being strong advocates for the Black community, saying, you know, we need this to be a priority, we need to see that. I need you to look, I need you to pull the data. I need you to look at the data. What students are performing and at what levels? You know, data has shown that by 36 months, you can already see a word gap, right? And that's going to be a determinant for how students are performing in the future. I'm also really concerned about the expense reduction and eliminating expanded learning summer programs, because like I said, by age 36 months, you can already see a word gap. If we have students that are already coming in disproportionately behind their peers, we have to play the catch-up game, and that's the job of the school, right? So with community engagement and the school being engaged, we can do that, but we need that to be reflected in the budget as a priority. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Renee Webster Hawkins. I'm a parent in the district. A couple of small items on the budget. Certainly appreciate some of the thoughtful additions and cuts that the superintendent is offering. And as a parent trying to grasp both the budget and the LCAP, it would be helpful to have some understanding of how those additions you just presented either fit in the current LCAP or will be revised into the LCAP, both the activities and the budgets. Another item on one of the slides that you presented, Mr. Superintendent, was that legal costs would be cut in the area of $1.5 million. Be helpful to know what costs those are and how those are planned to be cut. More broadly, the main criticism that I would have is that the special ed expenditures and revenues are not reflected well in this budget. At the last board meeting, I shared some comments about the SELPA plan budget and understanding that there's a state form that's essentially a one-pager that's a high-level roll-up. Maybe that's enough to satisfy the state, but I would think that this board and certainly this community need more transparency at a line item level, both on the revenue side and both the federal funds and the general funds that the district is devoting, and by line item, what those expenditures are for special education kids, given the multiple audits, the comprehensive reviews, the remediation that the district is under, given the special ed services. I would also think that just like the $250,000 being set aside for African American Achievement Initiative, a similar and commensurate effort would be invested in our special education students, because we need to remember that the intersectionality between the crisis affecting our African American boys is right there, right alongside the crisis that's affecting our students with disabilities. The over-identification of African American students with emotional disabilities was reflected in the May 17 audit, and it's a twin crisis that must be addressed together. So I'd appreciate some consideration of that.
Thank you, Renee. We have no further. Yes. At this time, we have no further public comment. We're going to take questions and comments from board members, and Gerardo will be answering the questions, and not you, Superintendent.
We want to make a correction. The slides 27 and 28, the printing copies are correct. The version in the PowerPoint is one version before. So yes, 27 and 28, those are the corrections from that.
So slide 29 actually is inaccurate. So the slide that we were looking at.
So these are the
So it's now updated on the screen, reflecting the move from the $100,000 in an expansion on safe haven investment for citizenship programs to move that monies into the grade level readiness initiative. And I'm just pointing that out because that will be what we end up voting on, not what was originally presented.
And also this version right here is a correction too. It's like 30. You will see that the legal fees are not included.
And we all have that reflected in the copies before us. I'll note that for the record. Board Member Wu.
Thank you, President Ryan. I just want to thank the Mike Kennedy people coming out in support of the ASICS project program. I think the ASICS program, if I remember correctly from last year, comes out of our 21st Century grant that we lost last year. And so we made it up. And we made it up this year. We don't know, looking at future funding, whether or not we can afford to make it up. But what I'm suggesting is those programs that were previously funded under 21st Century may start to become competitive, not unlike what is required under LCFF. In the future, I'm hoping that the programs, and we had Stacy, when we had Stacy Alt, she was supposed to implement this into our after-school programming, that to tell the providers to start collecting data in terms of what the expectation of student outcome was going to be. And so I'm articulating it now because if we find ourselves in this situation again, I am hoping that some of our decisions regarding additional funding for after-school programs, even though it's didn't fall under LCFF and the requirements of the LCAP, will be looked at competitively with that in mind. That is, I'm hoping that when we start to make these tough decisions, the providers will be providing the data to show us that it is a wise decision to spend the funding in that area, and this is the outcomes that we're going to expect.
Thank you, Board Member Wu. Board Member Vang, followed by Board Member Hanson.
I just want to thank you, President Ryan. I just want to take this time to thank Superintendent for his very transparent presentation. I just did have a question. I wanted to know on slide 30, the proposed expense reduction. How did these options actually make the proposed list? What was your rationale in deciding that these would make the list? I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure thing, Member Vang. Certainly, at the top of my priority is to make sure that any cuts or reductions have very little to no effect on our students in our classrooms, in our schools. So this was just making a commitment to look at any additional ways that we could reduce expenses. And obviously, none of them are easy to propose to the board. And we are just going to have to try to do the same work that we're expected to do and that we are committed to doing on behalf of our community with fewer resources.
Okay. My second question is, have we done an assessment of current programs now in the district to see if they're impactful? Perhaps we could cut some of those programs and take those cost savings to allocate them to programs like the expanded learning. I'd be interested to know if there's been an assessment done on just programs throughout the district.
It's the process that we've begun now in terms of looking at outcomes that our programs are producing, and that's applying to everyone depending on the board's decision. This evening on my calendar, I have a meeting with all senior staff in CERNA tomorrow morning to discuss what potential decisions were made this evening by the board.
Okay. Thank you.
Board Member Hanson.
Thank you. Thank you to the superintendent and staff on putting together our best budget yet, clarity-wise and transparency-wise, and the ability to have that presented well. It's exciting to have Karen and Liz and other folks come up and just say, support the budget. I don't know I've ever heard that in 6 years right off the bat. So I'm excited that I think we're absolutely moving in the right direction of making our community partners and making sure folks can participate and see what we're doing. And I also know you wanted to share at some point that we've got links to different parts through our website so folks can really do the deep dive that our partners at Making Sense Work and others have learned how to read the budget and trying to be as ultimately transparent with everything that we can. My only request would be for us to, on a one-time basis, add back in the $25,000 for the fingerprinting. That's several hundred parents that wouldn't be able to participate in doing volunteer work in their communities without that. That would be my only request to my fellow board members. In addition to the motion to move the budget at the right time, is to add that back in on a one-time basis. And to have it prioritized to low-income, families first.
Thank you, Board Member Hanson. Board Member Minnick.
Thank you. President Ryan, first, I did also want to thank the superintendent for this outlay of information. I feel like I am one who struggles with wrapping my brain around a lot of this, and so I really appreciate the great detail you went into and clarity. I also want to thank the folks who came out to advocate for the after-school programs, and as someone who started their child development career in after-school programs, I understand the value it has for kids, but also the value it has for staff. And a lot of child development careers have started in after-school programs. So it was nice to see folks advocating. And And with that, I appreciate, in looking at this budget, the superintendent's focus on keeping what we have right now to the best of our ability, and then at the same time being really open and honest with us that, here are all the things that are coming up that we need to address, and not asking us to address them all right now, but looking at, now we have, a good chunk of time to really dive into what are all these factors that we can adjust over the course of the year before our next budget cycle. So I appreciate that. The other thing is, well, a couple other things is that, one, I appreciate your caution in looking at what our revenues are going to be, and I know Gerardo, you as well, and in looking at what our revenue is going to be, and what feels a little bit like underestimating our revenues and overestimating our expenses, but I would much rather we looked at things in a cautious manner, because I'd hate to get to a point in the year where we have issues with just being able to provide some of our basic services. So I appreciate the caution that you all put into the budget. The only other thing I just wanted to mention is you mentioned how some programs where we've lost funding or there's been change in the cost, and I don't think it was in the handout, but there's a slide that shows the next one. So here I'll use child development as an example, is because I'm familiar with those programs. One of the things that's interesting is when you look at what is it, we lose $1,500. Why does it cost us $23.45 to cover those programs, even though we've only lost like a certain amount? But I think it's important for folks to know that for programs such as Head Start, there's a certain amount that we're given by the federal government to support Head Start programs. Our teachers in early education here in the district get paid far higher than that we're reimbursed for, and I think they deserve every penny of that. But in doing so, that's a cost that's associated with us. So like when we lose that funding, we also have our additional funding that we're already putting into it that's coming out of our expenses. And I think partially that's why we have such an amazing early education program here. But so I just wanted to make sure folks understood that why sometimes those numbers looks like, we're only losing this much. How come it's costing us this much? But it's because we're already putting in quite a bit to supplement the salaries of a lot of those staff. And that was it. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Minnick. I had just a couple questions and comments. First, I wanted to ask Gerardo, I know that the superintendent alluded to the resources potentially that we have for our lowest performing subgroup as a result of a budget deal that was made with Assemblymember Weber, Dr. Weber. That was originally a policy piece that was moving, that was incorporated into the budget. I'm hearing that she might also pursue legislation, because this is actually significantly less resources than had originally been envisioned. So I think we would be looking at about $2,000 per student. We would have that for 900 students, which potentially could generate a significant amount of money. When we talk about the lowest performing subgroup, that would be African American students, because this budget provision actually exempts special education students who I heard received set-aside money of another subset as part of this budget deal. So can you speak to, one, the additional investment for special education students that's likely to come out of the final budget trailer language, and two, your understanding of the monies that would be received for our lowest performing subgroup? If you don't have the information, I understand much of this has come out in the last few days. That's fine. I can follow up with you at a later time.
Yes, yeah. The lower performance, what you described, that's exactly what we know. Just what we hear is $2,000 per student, but don't call me yet because until the trailer bill is final, a lot of it's the devil in the details. And sometimes that happens even after the governor signs the budget. Sometimes we know the details up to a month later because this, what I know is a block grant. There's going to be a requirement. There's going to be a reporting. So it's going to be a compliance that you can use it only for these students. So it's kind of go back to like what we used to be like categorical programs. So like where local control, we decide this one, the state is going to tell us how and to who it has to be direct.
And I think the challenge for the budget trailer language versus the policy bill that was moving is the policy bill would have changed LCFF funding moving forward. The budget trailer bill is one-time funding, right? And so we can put in place some good work for a year to serve that community, but then we're going to have to figure out how we continue the resources.
I hear it's one time, but we have after 3 years to use it. So so it's a 3-year period. It's decided one time. But it ends in three years.
Okay.
That's what I know. So,
so
we have some planning.
So thank you. Just a couple comments. I mean, the superintendent talked about the dynamic nature of the budget, and I thought it was really helpful to have that illustration of actuals versus projecteds and the interims. And certainly we've seen in the last few days that dynamic nature of the budget process from the proposals presented by both the Assembly and the Senate to what actually came out of conference committee. And I know we have Capitol staff who are very well aware of that. So we have to operate under those confines, knowing that what we believe we have today might not actually materialize when we see the final budget that the governor signs. And so I appreciated that reality check, if you will. I strongly agree with the superintendent's desire to do an independent audit of the district finances. I think that that's going to be essential, particularly as we have a rather grave financial outlook, to figure out how we invest in such a way that really actualizes this vision of equity and social justice. And so I'll be interested in those independent audit findings. I also wanted to call out the low administrative overhead. I mean, I think we saw that we were the second lowest district still at about 4.2%. And I know that the superintendent is even exploring the potential of making that even leaner, although it is a painful thought given how much is being asked of the staff right now. And I want to thank the superintendent for coming in. As we know, new superintendents often come in, they bring their whole team with them. Our superintendent has really just backfilled a position and I think creatively moved around one more and really had a commitment to trying to ensure the success of the current team. So thank you, and we need to figure out how we ensure that that team can support this very difficult work. I'm concerned when I see things like the potential of cutting a $3 million expenditure for the expanded learning summer program. And obviously what we're voting on tonight is the elimination of the expanded learning summer program. And let me tell you why that's terribly concerning to me. I know that this initiative has in many ways moved at lightning rod, and certainly we will, at the end of this summer, assess what worked well and what needs to happen differently for next year. But my daughter is participating in ELSP right now, and what was remarkable to me when I went and visited her school site the first day is that this program aimed at grade level readiness is primarily comprised of students that look just like my daughter. So what I'm saying is Latino and African American students are in large numbers the ones who are benefiting from this intervention. And so I worry if we eliminate that key intervention and opportunity to promote grade level readiness, where we will find another intervention. And so I will be interested in hearing ideas for actualizing healthcare savings or other opportunities to direct money into services that serve students who might fall behind and fail otherwise. And so those were all my comments for the evening. With that, I think we had a motion by, do we have one more comment? Yeah, I can make a motion. Yes, and I actually want to clarify. The amendment on the table that I'm understanding on the $25,000 for fingerprinting is up to $25,000 for fingerprinting of our low-income parents and families. Up to $25,000 is an expenditure for fingerprinting of low-income families. So do we have a motion? Second? A student preferential vote?
Aye.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I also want to say thank you to Gloria and her team. There were many weekends, long nights, Labor Day to do this budget. It's a lot of work, so I appreciate her work, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you.